9 million people watched a whale. One of them accidentally solved a 5-year missing persons case. Her mother had spent $47,000 searching for her. She never stopped. She never knew. March 14th, 2019, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. A 17-year-old girl named Leah Roberts walked out of Harborview High School at 3:22 p.m. and disappeared. She had a biology test the next morning. She had a half-finished friendship bracelet in her backpack. She had a pink hoodie tied around her waist. She never came home. Here is what separates this case from every missing person story you have ever heard. Leah wasn't taken. She wasn't lured. She wasn't abducted. She chose to disappear. And for 5 years, 5 full years, no one knew why. The person who finally found her wasn't a detective, wasn't a private investigator, wasn't an FBI tip line. It was a whale. 5 years. March 2019 to March 2024. That is 1,826 days of not knowing if your daughter was alive or dead. 1,826 mornings where Irene Walsh woke up and Leah was the first thought in her head. And then, on a Sunday afternoon in March 2024, a 26-year-old in Charlotte, North Carolina opened his phone, found a video from a beach trip he'd half forgotten, and posted it. The world watched a whale breach the surface. One person looked at the background, and 1,826 days of silence ended in 48 hours. But here is what no headline told you. Leah wasn't hiding because she was in danger from a stranger. She was hiding because home was the danger. And when they found her, when her mother finally stood in front of her for the first time in 5 years, the reunion was not what anyone expected. It was not a tearful embrace. It was not forgiveness. It was 2 women with entirely different versions of the same 5 years. And only one of them had been safe. Leah Roberts was 17 years old when she vanished. Junior at Harborview High School, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. She was not a troubled kid, not failing, not isolated. She tutored younger students after school on Wednesdays. She was saving money for a ceramics class at the Community Arts Center. She had 4 friends she genuinely trusted, which, at 17, in a beach town where everyone knows everyone, is harder than it sounds. But she was also difficult in the way that genuinely perceptive teenagers are difficult. She argued back. She didn't let things go. If she thought something was unfair, she said so, at the dinner table, in the car, in front of guests. Her friends loved this about her. It made adults uncomfortable. Her school counselor's file, reviewed during the 2019 investigation, contained one note dated November 2018. Leah is bright and assertive, can come across as confrontational when she feels she isn't being heard. Monitor for stress at home. Monitor for stress at home. The note was filed. Nobody followed up. The one detail everyone remembered, the thing that surfaces every time someone who knew her is asked to describe her, is that she kept a jar of sea glass on her windowsill. She'd been collecting it since she was 9, little pieces of blue and green and frosted white, worn smooth by the ocean. She loved the coast. Hold on to that detail. It comes back. Irene Walsh had remarried in 2016. Her new husband was Warren Nash, commercial real estate, well-dressed, the kind of man who remembered the names of waiters and tipped generously when other people were watching. In the early months, Leah had actually liked him, or tried to. He took them to dinner. He fixed things around the house without being asked. He made Irene laugh in a way her father never had. Leah told her friend group in late 2016 that her mom's new husband was actually not terrible. That lasted about 8 months. By mid-2017, something had shifted. It started small enough that Leah spent a long time wondering if she was imagining it. He'd ask where she was going with a friendliness that felt like surveillance. He had opinions about her clothes that he framed as concern. He'd come home and the temperature of the room would change before he said a word. Behind the front door, he operated entirely on control. Not physical, not yet, but relentless. He monitored her phone. He made dinner feel like a performance review. She told her mother in the spring of 2018, and again in the autumn. Irene said she was overreacting, both times. The second time, Warren was in the next room. Irene lowered her voice and said, "He's going through a stressful period at work. Just give him space." Leah gave him space. She gave him all the space in the world. Thursday, March 14th, 2019. School ended at 3:20 p.m. Leah attended every class, had lunch with her friend group, borrowed a pencil in fifth period and never returned it, a small, ordinary thing that her friend Emma would think about for years afterward. At 3:22 p.m., security cameras at Harborview High captured her walking through the main exit, pink hoodie tied around her waist, backpack on both shoulders, ponytail, looking straight ahead. She turned left out of the gate. The bus stop was to the right. That was the last confirmed footage of Leah Roberts in Myrtle Beach. Irene reported her missing at 7:43 p.m. when Leah didn't come home for dinner and her phone went straight to voicemail. The phone never pinged again. Police opened a missing persons case. Working theory within the first week, runaway. The evidence supported it. Leah had $220 in cash, birthday money from her grandmother. She had made no bank withdrawals after the cash was in hand, which meant she'd planned to use it and leave nothing traceable. No sign of forced entry, no witnesses to any struggle. The active investigation wound down in 8 weeks. Irene Walsh did not wind down. She posted Leah's face on every missing persons group she could find. She drove to neighboring counties and put up flyers at bus depots, rest stops, gas stations. She hired a private investigator for 4 months and spent $14,000 on that alone. He found nothing. She called the police every 30 days for 5 years. Every single month. March 9th, 2024, Charlotte, North Carolina. A 26-year-old named Brian Gibson was going through his old camera roll on a slow Sunday afternoon. He found a video from March 2019, a beach trip to the South Carolina coast with 2 college friends. Long weekend, nothing special. The video was 34 seconds long. It showed a humpback whale breaching, fully, completely, impossibly, off the South Carolina coast. The whale cleared the surface entirely, hung in the air for what felt like 3 full seconds before it came back down. Brian had been filming the open ocean from a boardwalk and almost missed it. He posted it March 9th, 2024 with the caption, "Found this in my camera roll from 5 years ago. Lost my mind when I filmed it. Still can't believe this happened. Whales hit different." Within 72 hours, 9.4 million views. The whale, obviously, people losing their minds over the whale. But one person out of 9.4 million, wasn't watching the whale. 9.4 million people watched that video. And sitting in those 34 seconds, in the background, barely in frame, was the answer to a 5-year missing persons case. But what cracked it open didn't require technology, didn't require law enforcement. It required one volunteer account, one paused screen, and one person who happened to remember what a 2019 missing poster looked like. Here is how a comment section cracked open a cold case. At the 17-second mark in Brian's 34-second video, far left of frame, almost cropped out, there is a beachside cafe. It's called Strand and Salt. Small outdoor deck facing the water, wooden railings, a few umbrella tables. And clearing one of those tables is a young woman, dark hair in a ponytail, a pink hoodie tied around her waist. She is visible for approximately 2 seconds. Her face turns partially toward the camera as she stacks plates. Then she's back inside, gone. 2 seconds out of 34. On March 11th, 2 days after the video went live, a volunteer-run missing persons tracking account called Found or Finding posted a comment. Can someone freeze at 017? Far left of frame, pink hoodie, girl clearing tables. I might be losing my mind, but that looks like Leah Roberts. Myrtle Beach, SC, missing since March 2019. The comment included a link to a 5-year-old missing persons flyer. Within 6 hours, 14,000 likes. Within 12, 52,000. People were pausing at 017, screenshotting the girl in the background, placing her side by side with Leah's missing poster. Same dark hair, same slight frame, same way of wearing the hoodie, tied at the waist, not the shoulders. It wasn't conclusive. Faces blur at that resolution. 2 seconds at that distance isn't courtroom evidence, but it was enough to start something. Here's what we know at this point. Stay with me. The video was filmed in March 2019, the same month Leah disappeared. The girl has Leah's hair, Leah's build, and the pink hoodie. Stop there. The pink hoodie was in the original police report. The last confirmed footage of Leah, from the school security camera on March 14, 2019, showed her with a pink hoodie tied around her waist. Exact match. Same garment, same position on the body. So the question becomes, did she go north? Is there any evidence she took a route toward that boardwalk? Because if she did, if the records confirm it, then this stops being a coincidence. It becomes a trail. Detectives pulled Harborview High School's security footage again, watched it frame by frame. At 3:22 p.m. on the day Leah disappeared, she turned left out of the school gate. Left is toward the highway, toward the coastal bus route that runs north up the Grand Strand. Pawleys Island is north. That's where the cafe was. That's where Brian Gibson filmed The Whale. In the original 2019 investigation, police had assumed she was heading toward a friend's house in that direction. They checked 3 names. Nothing. But nobody had checked the bus route itself. Nobody had asked, what if she bought a ticket? The Transit Authority kept 5-year-old records. On March 14, 2019, the day Leah vanished, at 4:08 p.m., a passenger boarded the northbound Coastal Express at the Harborview stop. Cash fare, no name required. The route terminated at Pawleys Island. She didn't run into the wilderness. She didn't hitchhike. She took a scheduled bus that ran every 2 hours. And here is the detail that changes everything about how you understand this girl. The $220 in cash, the birthday money from her grandmother, had been withdrawn in 2 separate amounts over 2 separate weeks, so it wouldn't look like one sudden withdrawal. So nobody would notice. So nobody would ask questions before she was ready. She hadn't grabbed money in a panic. She had saved it methodically over 2 weeks while going to school every morning and coming home every night and sitting at that dinner table and giving Warren Nash his space. This was not impulsive. This was not a breakdown. This was a 17-year-old girl who had planned her own disappearance. calmly, carefully, across 6 weeks, and had decided that vanishing was safer than staying. Let that land. Police contacted Brian Gibson on March 12, 2024. He still had the original full-quality video. Location metadata embedded in the file. Pawleys Island Boardwalk, Strand and Salt Cafe. Detectives drove to Pawleys Island that afternoon. Strand and Salt was still open. Same owner, Wendy Skinner, 58, who had run the place for 11 years. They showed her Leah's 2019 missing poster. Wendy looked at it for a long time, set it down on the counter, picked it back up. Then she said, "That's Sophie Kendall. She worked here. Sweet kid, very quiet, very good with the regulars." Sophie Kendall had walked into the cafe on March 16, 2019, 2 days after Leah vanished. She said she was 18, just moved to the area, had some waitressing experience, needed work. Wendy hired her on the spot. Spring season was 2 weeks away, and she was short-staffed. Sophie, Leah, worked at Strand and Salt for nearly 3 years. She lived in a staff cottage behind the property. Wendy paid cash, off the books. No ID on file. No questions asked. "I figured she was in some kind of trouble at home," Wendy said later. "You learn to read that in people. She wasn't in danger out here. She was safe. She worked hard. She didn't steal. She showed up every shift for 3 years. I wasn't going to make her explain herself to me." 3 years. Leah Roberts had been living 25 miles from her mother for 3 consecutive years. 25 miles. Going to work, learning the regulars' orders, watching the ocean from the deck between the lunch rush and the dinner service, while Irene Walsh called the police every 30 days and drove up and down the same coastline looking for her. We know where she was. We know how she got there. We know she planned it for 6 weeks, methodically, quietly, while still going home every night. But we still don't have the most important piece. We don't have what she said when police knocked on her door. We don't have her words. And we don't have the room, the mediator's office, the folding chairs, the 2 women who hadn't been in the same space for 5 years. Because that room is where this story stops being a missing persons case and becomes something else entirely. Stay with me. After 3 years at Strand and Salt, Leah moved south to Beaufort, South Carolina, a small coastal city about 80 miles away, far enough that no one would know her face. She was working at a coffee shop called Low Country Grounds, living under the same name, Sophie Kendall, in a small apartment above a hardware store, with a cat she'd found behind the cafe and named Tide. She had been watching the missing persons posts about herself for 5 years. She knew her mother was looking. She had never reached out. Not once. Not an anonymous text. Not a letter with no return address. Why? March 14th, 2024. Exactly 5 years to the day. 2 detectives knocked on the door of Leah Roberts' apartment in Beaufort. She opened the door, looked at the badges, looked at their faces, and she said, "It was the whale video, wasn't it?" She already knew. She'd seen the TikTok 3 days earlier. She'd watched Found or Findings comment climb to 52,000 likes. She'd watched strangers on the internet hold her face next to her own missing poster. She'd had 72 hours to disappear again. She hadn't moved. She invited them in, offered them coffee, sat down at her kitchen table, and told them everything. Warren wasn't just controlling, he was escalating. In the 6 months before I left, something had shifted. He started coming into my room at night to check on things, going through my belongings in the dark, standing in the doorway, not saying anything, just standing there, watching, for a minute or two, and then leaving. I told my mother what he was doing. She said I was imagining it. She said I was trying to sabotage her marriage because I couldn't handle her being happy. She said those words. She said if I kept making accusations, she would need to ask me to speak to someone. The second time I told her, Warren was in the next room. She didn't lower her voice much. I understood then that I was not going to be believed, and I understood that if he escalated, if the thing I was afraid of happened, my mother would still not believe me. She had already made her choice about who she was going to believe. She made it while he was standing in the next room. So I planned. I researched bus routes. I saved cash carefully over 2 weeks. I identified a town far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone, close enough to the coast that I could find work. I didn't contact her because she would have told Warren where I was. Not to hurt me. She would have told him because she had decided my fear was drama. And once a mother decides that, she doesn't undecide it easily. I saw every post she made about me. I watched all of it every month for 5 years. And every month I made the same calculation. She is suffering, and I am safe. Hidden is safer than found. Until it isn't. I didn't run when I saw the TikTok comment. I thought about it. Then I thought, I'm 22. I'm not hiding anymore. Let them come. She said all of it quietly, without breaking eye contact, without asking for anything. She had simply decided a long time ago what she was worth, and she had built her life accordingly. Police launched an immediate investigation into Warren Nash. They found nothing. No criminal record, no prior domestic incidents on file, no complaints from neighbors, no red flags on any system. Warren Nash had the profile of a man who had never done anything wrong. He was brought in for a voluntary interview. He sat down calmly. He described Leah as a difficult teenager who had resented his relationship with Irene from the beginning. He said it with a sadness that read as genuine, the kind of sadness that has been practiced until it feels real. He said he'd always hoped she'd come back when she was ready. Then the detective told him Leah was alive and living in Beaufort. Warren Nash nodded, said, "That's a relief for Irene." For Irene. The interview continued for 45 minutes. In 45 minutes of discussing a stepdaughter who had been missing for 5 years, a stepdaughter who had just been found alive, Warren Nash never once asked what she had said about him. Not once. He didn't ask where she'd been living. He didn't ask what had made her leave. He didn't ask what she'd told police. Think about what that means. Sit with it. If you were an innocent man, if you genuinely had no idea why your stepdaughter had vanished from her own life at 17, the first words out of your mouth when police told you she'd been found would be, what did she say? Why did she leave? What happened to her? He asked none of those things, because he already knew why she left. He didn't ask what she'd said because he'd spent 5 years calculating exactly how much she knew and how much she could prove. And the safest move, the move of a man who had spent years making himself invisible, was to say as little as possible and point the remaining words at someone else. That's a relief for Irene. 6 words. Careful. controlled, aimed at someone else. No charges were filed. Leah's account, unverifiable, uncorroborated, 5 years old, did not meet the threshold for prosecution. Warren Nash walked out of that interview and drove home, to the house where Leah had lived, to Irene. Before the reunion, before we show you what happened when Leah and Irene were finally in the same room, we have to address the question that split every comment section on every piece of coverage about this case. Should Leah have told her mother she was safe? Half the internet says she was a minor when she left. She had every right to remove herself from an unsafe home. Her mother had already chosen Warren Nash over her own daughter twice, out loud. Leah owes nothing to someone who didn't protect her. The other half says, regardless of what was happening at home, Irene Walsh spent $47,000 and 5 years of her life believing her child might be dead. 4 words, "I'm safe, don't look," sent anonymously from anywhere. That was all it would have taken to end 5 years of a mother's suffering. Here is where I land. Both of those things are true, at the same time, without canceling each other out. Leah had every right to leave. Her fear was real. Her planning wasn't paranoia. It was a 17-year-old doing the only rational thing available to her when the person who was supposed to protect her had decided not to. And Irene Walsh's suffering was real. A mother who called the police every 30 days for 5 years, who paid a man $400 to stand at a bus depot with a photograph, who ran out of rational options and drove to a psychic because it was the only thing she hadn't tried. The rage in this story is not aimed at Leah. The rage is not aimed at Irene. The rage belongs to Warren Nash, who created conditions in that house that made a 17-year-old calculate across 6 weeks that vanishing was safer than staying. And the rage belongs to the school counselor who wrote "Monitor for Stress at Home" in November 2018 and filed it and never followed up. And to every structure around them that made it easier for a man like Warren to remain invisible than for a girl like Leah to be believed. That is where the fury goes. That is where it belongs. April 2024. A mediator-led meeting arranged by Horry County Family Services, a conference room in a government building, folding chairs, a table with a water pitcher nobody touched. Warren Nash was not present. Irene Walsh and Leah Roberts sat in the same room for the first time in 5 years. Neither of them spoke for almost a full minute. Then Irene said, "You've been 25 miles away for 3 years. I drove past Pawleys Island in 2020 on the way to a woman who said you were near water. I was right there. I drove past you." Leah said, "I know." Irene said, "I spent $47,000 looking for you. I remortgaged the car. I paid a man $400 to stand outside a bus depot in Charleston for 2 days with your photograph." She stopped. "How could you let me do that?" Leah said, "I told you what he was doing. You didn't believe me." Irene said, "You were a teenager. Teenagers exaggerate. You always made everything—" Leah said, "I was 17 and I was scared and I told you. And you told me I was making it about myself." A long silence. Irene said, quieter now, the anger dropping out of her voice, "I didn't know it was that serious. I didn't know he was... I thought you were being dramatic. I genuinely thought that." Leah looked at her mother for a long moment. "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." Another silence, the longest one. Then Irene said, so quietly it was almost missed, "I thought you were dead. For 5 years, I thought you were dead." Leah said, "I know. I'm sorry for that part. I am genuinely sorry for that part." Then, "But you stayed with Warren, and I needed you not to." The meeting ended 31 minutes after it began. Leah drove herself back to Beaufort. She did not look back. In the beginning of this story, we told you about Leah's jar of sea glass. Little pieces of blue and green and frosted white, worn smooth by the ocean. On her windowsill in Myrtle Beach since she was 9 years old, she loved the coast. When police found her in Beaufort on March 14, 2024, on the exact anniversary of the day she disappeared, they noted the apartment. On the windowsill, a mason jar, full of sea glass, blue and green and frosted white, worn smooth by the ocean. She hadn't left everything behind. She had taken the things that were only hers, the things no person and no circumstance could reach, and carried them 80 miles south and put them in the window of a new life. She had found herself a town by the water, given herself a different name, and kept on collecting. Nobody asked her about the jar. Nobody needed to. She had not stopped being herself. She had just put herself somewhere safe. That is not a small thing. For a long time, it was everything. As of the filming of this video, no criminal charges have been filed against Warren Nash. Leah's account, unverifiable, uncorroborated, 5 years old, did not meet the threshold for prosecution. Warren Nash still lives in Myrtle Beach. Irene Walsh still lives in the same house. Leah Roberts, still going by Sophie Kendall in her daily life, still lives in Beaufort. She has not spoken to her mother since the April meeting. She has not ruled out speaking to her again someday. That is the closest thing to an open door that currently exists between them. Brian Gibson, the man who filmed the whale, gave several interviews in the weeks after the story broke. He said this: "I filmed a whale. I accidentally filmed a missing girl. The whale is why I was there. The whale is why I was filming. The whale is why the video went viral. The whale is the reason anyone paused at the 17-second mark instead of just watching the whale. If the whale doesn't breach, if it doesn't fully clear the surface at that exact second, I don't post it. Nobody watches. Nobody pauses. Nobody sees her." Everything had to go exactly right. 5 years of nothing. Then a whale. Brian's video was one video, one whale, one viral moment, one volunteer account that happened to remember a 5-year-old flyer. Remove any single one of those things. The whale doesn't breach, the video doesn't go viral, found or finding doesn't see it. Nobody remembers the flyer. And Leah Roberts is still Sophie Kendall in Beaufort. And Irene Walsh is still calling the police every 30 days. That chain of accidents is what found her. Which means the real question underneath all of this is not about Leah. The question is, how many people are waiting for a chain of accidents that will never come? Think about your own camera roll. Every beach trip, birthday party, street video, skyline shot. How many strangers are in the edges of your photos that you have never once looked at? There are over 100 billion photos on Instagram since the platform launched. Billions more on Facebook, TikTok, Google Photos. And then the ones that were never posted at all, sitting on hard drives, old phones in drawers, memory cards in camera bags at the back of closets. Researchers at 3 universities are now running a project called Background Search. They apply facial recognition AI to publicly available viral content and cross-reference against the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. In the first month of the pilot, They identified 22 potential matches. 6 were confirmed as genuine missing persons. 6 families with answers. 6 out of however many thousands are still waiting. That is not a success story. That is the surface of something with no visible bottom. And here is the part that no one in the coverage of this case has addressed directly. The AI cannot tell the difference between someone who needs finding and someone who chose to disappear because disappearing was survival. If this technology had existed in 2019, if facial recognition had scanned every photo on the South Carolina coast and flagged Leah Roberts at Strand and Salt Cafe, it would have sent police to her door 2 years before she was ready. 2 years before she felt safe enough to stop running. How do you build a system that finds the ones who need finding without exposing the ones who need to stay hidden? Nobody has answered that. The case is closed. The question is not. We have covered all of it: the whale, the comment, the bus ticket, the cafe, the 5 years, the confrontation, the jar on the windowsill. But the most important question in this story is not about Leah. She's safe. She made herself safe. The most important question is about the next one. The one who didn't plan as carefully. The one who couldn't. The one whose face is in the background of a photo on someone's phone right now, and no one has looked. The only thing standing between that face and that family is whether anyone looks. If you made it this far, if you have been here for all of it, 2 things. Subscribe. There are more stories like this one, cases that didn't make the national news, people who were found in ways nobody expected, people who are still waiting. If this story mattered to you, the next one will too. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it, and share this video. Not for the numbers, not for the algorithm. Share it because Leah's story deserves to be heard. Share it because somebody in your life needs to hear it. Share it because the conversation it starts about belief, about safety, about what we ask of the people who are supposed to protect us is a conversation worth having. One share, that's all. Leah Roberts is 22 years old. She lives in Beaufort, South Carolina. She works in a coffee shop. She has a cat named Tide. She has a jar of sea glass on her windowsill. She is safe. That is not justice. Justice would mean Warren Nash sat in a courtroom and answered for what he did to that house. Justice would mean Irene Walsh had believed her daughter the first time, before Leah had to research bus schedules and count out cash across 2 weeks so nobody would notice. Justice would mean the school counselor who wrote "Monitor for Stress at Home" in November 2018 and filed it and moved on had done something with that note. What we have instead? She is safe. Warren Nash is not in a courtroom. Horry County Family Services closed the file. And somewhere right now, in someone's camera roll, in the background of a photo taken at a beach or a gas station or a street corner in a town you've never been to, there is a face. And that face belongs to someone whose family has been calling the police every 30 days. Go look.